Okay, welcome back to our Wednesday evening Bible study. And we are continuing, getting close to the end, to a change in this study. But we are back again on the trail of blood. This is part 17. And we are continuing with religion in the United States. So, there we go. Get my screen caught up with me here. So we want to continue in the final lecture that Dr. Carroll gave in his series, The Trail of Blood. By the way, The Trail of Blood is now available in ebook form, and it has been reproduced by the ministry publishing division of the ministry, and it's offered at a site that I can give you a little later if you would like to have it. The final lecture was entitled Religion in the United States, and so we'll then consider the final Church of Asia that depicts this particular era of church history. So let's continue in the text, the Trail of Blood. Religion in the United States continued. Elsewhere than Rhode Island, religious liberty came slowly and by degrees. For example, in Virginia, a law was passed permitting one, but only one, Baptist preacher to a county. Imagine. He was permitted to preach but once in 2 months. Later, this law was modified, permitting him to preach once in each month. That wasn't much of an improvement. But even then, in only one definite place in the county, and only one sermon on that day, and never to preach at night. Yes. It's no wonder those older preachers were long-winded, as they say. They had to cover a whole lot of territory in one sermon. Right. So laws were passed not only in Virginia, but in colonies elsewhere, positively forbidding any mission work. Now, can you imagine? Any mission work was just about any church activity was prohibited. Yeah. Well, you know why they didn't want mission work? Is because they didn't want to lose their own members. That was why the first foreign missionary law forbade. It took a long time and many hard battles in the Virginia House of Burgesses to greatly modify these laws. Evidently, one of the greatest obstructions to religious liberty in America, and probably all over the world as to that, was the conviction which had grown into the people throughout the preceding centuries that religion could not possibly live without government support. Now, it's evident that they had not been taught tithing or giving. two different things, but apparently they weren't taught either one, because they were dependent on the state to provide their funds. That no denomination could prosper solely on voluntary offerings by its adherents. They didn't think it could be done. It had to take the money from the state in order to survive. This was a hard argument to meet when the battle was raging for the disestablishment of the Church of England in Virginia, and also then later in Congress when the question of religious liberty was being discussed there. For a long time, the Baptists fought the battle almost alone. Rhode Island began her colony in 1638, but it was not legally chartered until 1663. This was the first spot where religious liberty was granted. The second place was in Virginia in 1786. Long time apart. Congress declared the First Amendment to the Constitution to be in force December the 15th in 1791, which granted religious liberty to all citizens. Baptists are credited with being the leaders in bringing this blessing to the nation. We venture to give only one congressional incident. The question of whether the United States should have an established church, meaning a state church, or several established churches, or religious liberty. And this was all being discussed. Several different bills have been offered. One recommending the Church of England as the established church, and another the Congregationalist church, and yet another the Presbyterian. Did you notice all of these were already state churches in the various states? So the Baptists, many of them, though probably none of them members of Congress, were earnestly contending for absolute religious liberty. It seems that it has been the trend down through the ages that Baptists have not been very active in public life. When I say public life, I mean in politics or in running of things.
You're never that active in me.
Yeah, right. I had my fingers in just about everything. James Madison, afterwards president, seemingly was their main supporter. In everything, chairman of the appeals board,
Yeah.
and several other things. Anyway, Patrick Henry arose and offered a substitute bill for them all. Quote, that 4 churches or denominations instead of 1 be established. Church of England, or Episcopal, Congregationalist, Presbyterian, and the Baptist. Finally, when each of the others saw that it could not be the sole established church, they each agreed on to accept Henry's compromise. this compromise bill stated that each person taxed would have the right to say which denomination of those four his money should go. The Baptists continued to fight against it all. That any combination of church and state was against their fundamental principles, and they could not accept it, even if voted. Henry pleaded with them, said he was trying to help them, that they could not live without it, but they still protested. So the vote was taken, and it carried nearly unanimously. But the measure had to be voted on 3 times. The Baptists, led by Madison, and possibly others, continued to fight. The second vote came. It carried almost unanimously, swept by Henry's masterful eloquence. But the third vote had yet to be taken. Now God seemingly intervened. Henry was made governor of Virginia and left Congress. When the third vote came, deprived of Henry's irresistible eloquence, the vote was lost. So thus, the Baptists came near being an established denomination over their most solemn protest. Now, this is not the only opportunity the Baptists ever had of becoming established by law, but it's probably the nearest that they ever came to it. Not long after this, the Church of England was entirely disestablished in America. No religious denomination was supported by the central government. A few separated state governments still had establishment, church and state. So as far as the United States was concerned, they were entirely separated. Now this is the true way of separation of church and state. Not the way that it has gotten turned around today. The state was not to have anything to do with the operation of churches. It didn't say that the churches could not be active in the state, in state government or U.S. government. But now it's turned around that the church keeps its hands off in government. Well, that's why we've got much of the problems we have today. These two, church and state, elsewhere at least, had for 1,500 years, since 313, been living in unholy wedlock. Religious liberty was, at least here in the United States, resurrected to die no more. And now gradually, in many places, slowly, it is spreading throughout the world. Well, that was in Dr. Carroll's time. It has become reversed to that now. But even in the United States, the church and state idea died hard. It lingered on in several of the separate states long after religious liberty had been put into the Constitution of the United States. Massachusetts, where the church and state idea first found a lodging place in America, has, as already stated, finally given it up. It had lived there for over 2.5 centuries. And even today, Massachusetts is probably the most liberal state that we have.
Next to California, or fighting with California. And New York.
Well, but you just, Massachusetts, you have to visit Massachusetts and travel around that state to really understand what I'm talking about. I've been in many towns in the state of Massachusetts. There is not a Baptist church to be found anywhere. Utah is the last lingering spot left to disfigure the face of the first and greatest nation on earth to adopt and cherish religious liberty. And why is that? Mormonism.
Was founded by the Mormons.
Yes. Remember, there can be no real and absolute religious liberty in the nation where the government gives its support to one special religious denomination. Some serious questions have many times been asked concerning Baptists. Would they, as a denomination, have accepted from any nation or state an offer of establishment if such a nation or state had freely made them such an offer? And would they, in case they had offered such or accepted such an offer, have become persecutors of others, like the Catholics, the Episcopalians, or Lutherans, or Presbyterians, or Congregationalists? Probably a little consideration of such questions now would not be amiss. Have the Baptists, as a fact, ever had such an opportunity? It's not recorded in history that on... Is it not? Thank you. Yeah, the whole thing you got there on the screen is one sentence, and so it ends with a question. Is it not recorded in history that on one occasion the king of the Netherlands at that time, embracing Norway, Sweden, Belgium, Holland, and Denmark, that was a pretty good-sized kingdom, had under serious consideration the question of having an established religion? Their kingdom at that time was surrounded on almost all sides by nations or governments with established religions supported by the civil government. It is stated that the King of Holland appointed a committee to examine into the claims of all existing churches or denominations to see which had the best claim to be the New Testament church. Well, guess what? The committee reported back that the Baptists were the best representatives of New Testament teachings. Then the king offered to make the Baptists the established church or denomination of his kingdom. The Baptists kindly thanked him, but declined, stating that it was contrary to their fundamental convictions and principles. But this was not the only opportunity they ever had of having their denomination the established religion of a people. They certainly had that opportunity when Rhode Island colony was founded. And to have persecuted others, well, that would have been an impossibility if they were to continue being Baptists. They were the original advocates of religious liberty. That really is one of the fundamental articles of the religious faith. They believed in the absolute separation of church and state. So strong has been the Baptist conviction on the question of church and state combination that they have invariably declined all offers of help from the state. We give here two instances, one in Texas and the other in Mexico. Long years ago, in the days of Baylor University's babyhood, Texas offered to help her. She declined the help, though she was in distressing need. The Texas Methodist had a baby school in Texas at the same time. They accepted the state help. That the school finally fell into the hands of the state. Yes, sir.
One point on that, hasn't been too long ago where our government has been offering financial help to churches.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we don't accept that.
That's right.
Yes.
During COVID, that was offered to so many churches, and there were a lot of churches that accepted that.
In
There's
time,
a lot of Baptist churches that accepted that.
and it's just time will tell.
At some point, the government's gonna want that back.
Yep.
They're not gonna want money.
Or they don't want to run it.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. They're not
Yeah.
gonna want the money back.
Oh, yeah.
They're gonna wanna run it.
Yeah.
Once you submit to the government thing, then they can get to where in there, and they can say what you can preach and what you can't preach.
Right. Many were originally against school accreditation for that cause.
Absolutely.
But it's not the accreditation that our schools, that some of our schools do have, is not run by any government agency or supposedly influenced by any government agency. They are independent, but they are recognized by many branches of government. I think that the misunderstanding was that if you accepted accreditation, that the government could come in and tell you what you would have to teach. But that's not the case. And it has never, it's never been revealed to be the case in any school. I'm talking about Bible schools, Bible seminaries that have been accredited. That was one of the holdups for our chaplains in the military for many, many years. They had to go outside of our association of churches to get the accreditation that they needed. I had to do that. Thankfully, there's a Baptist church in South Dakota. No, or is it North Dakota? I think, no, South Dakota. That was, their school was accredited. And so they allowed me to go through them. The founder of the school was also the beginning missionary of the church that sponsors that school. And that gentleman was not only a chaplain himself, but he knew Dr. Garner, Albert Garner, and many other ABA brethren. And their statement of faith is just like ours. There are a lot of scriptural churches that are in associations that don't fellowship with us, but they're the same, or almost the same. All right, the case was in Mexico, occurred in this wise. W.D. Powell was our missionary there, missionary to Mexico. Now, when Dr. Carroll says our, remember, he was part of the Southern Baptist Convention at that time. And that was before that the Southern Baptist Convention went so haywire. By his missionary work, he had made a great impression for the Baptist upon the governor Madero of the state of Coahuila. Madero offered a great gift to the Baptists from the state if the Baptist would establish a good school in the state of Coahuila, Mexico. Can't remember which one, I think it's one of them that borders the U.S. The matter was submitted by Powell to the foreign board. The gift was declined because it was to be from the state. Afterwards, Madero gave a good large sum personally. And that was accepted. And the Madero Institute was built and established. You get the difference. State funds versus private funds. All right, some afterthoughts. During each period of the Dark Ages, I was waiting for my slides to catch up. There were in existence many Christians and many separate and independent churches, some of them dating back to the times of the apostles, which were never in any way connected with the Catholic Church. They always wholly rejected and repudiated the Catholics and their doctrines. This is clearly a fact that's clearly demonstrated by credible history. Second thing, these Christians were the perpetual objects of bitter and relentless persecution. History shows that during the period of the Dark Ages, about 12 centuries, beginning with AD 426, there were about 50 million of these Christians who died martyr deaths. Very many thousands of others, both preceding and succeeding the Dark Ages, died under the same hard hand of persecution. These Christians, during these dark days of many centuries, were called by many different names, all given to them by their enemies. These names were sometimes given because of some especially prominent and heroic leader, and sometimes from other causes, and sometimes, yea, many times, same people holding the same views were called by different names in different localities. But And all of the many changes, amid all the many changes of names, there was one special name, or rather designation, which clung to at least some of these Christians throughout all the Dark Ages. That designation being Anabaptist. This compound word applied as a designation of some certain Christians who were found in history during the 3rd century. In a suggestive fact, soon after the origin of infant baptism, and a more suggestive fact that even prior to the use of the name Catholic. Thus, the name Anabaptists is the oldest denominational name in history. The fourth thought, a striking peculiarity of these Christians was and continued to be in succeeding centuries. They rejected the man-made doctrine of infant baptism and demanded rebaptism, even though done by immersion for all those who came to them having been baptized in infancy. For this peculiarity, they were called Anabaptists. This special designation was applied to many of these Christians who bore other nicknames. Especially is this true of the Donatists, Paulicians, Albigenses, and ancient Waldenses, and others. In later centuries, this designation came to be a regular name applied to a distinct group. These were simply called Anabaptists, and gradually all other names were dropped. You can still find some churches called Anabaptist churches in Europe, in Eastern Europe, today. Very early in the 16th century, even prior to the origin of the Lutheran Church, the first of all the Protestant churches, the word Anna was beginning to be left off, and they were simply called Baptists. Into the Dark Ages, when a group of many churches, which were never in any way identified with the Catholics. And out of the Dark Ages came a group of many churches which had never been in any way identified with the Catholics. Now, the following are some of the fundamental doctrines to which they held when they went in. And the same are the fundamental doctrines to which they held when they came out. And the same are the fundamental doctrines to which they now hold. So let's look at these. A spiritual church, Christ, its founder, its only head and lawgiver. Its ordinances, only two: baptism and the Lord's Supper. And they are typical and memorial, not saving. Its officers, only two: bishops or pastors and deacons. They are servants of the church. Its government, a pure democracy, and that executive only, never legislative. Its laws and doctrines, the New Testament, and that only. It's not that we do not pay attention to the Old Testament, but the New Testament contains our system of faith and doctrine, and it's our operating procedures, if you will. Its members, believers only, they saved by grace, not works, through the regenerating power of the Holy Spirit. Its requirements, believers on entering the church to be baptized, that by immersion, then obedience and loyalty to all New Testament laws. The various churches, separate and independent in their execution of laws and discipline, and in their responsibilities to God, but cooperative in work. A complete separation of church and state. Absolute religious liberty for all. Thus, Dr. Carroll ended his lectures. And as we have seen, Baptists have a long and bloody history. Baptists are distinct from all other groups. And let us pray that we will always remain distinct. Now, in the next presentation, we'll consider the final church of the 7 churches of Asia, Laodicea. Any questions, comments? After the look at Laodicea, we're going to look at some of the history of the churches in America. We've had just a little tidbit of it, but I want to try to get a little deeper into that for a few presentations.
You've been listening to the live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study of the Mayfield Drive Baptist Church in Smyrna, Tennessee. We invite you to tune in at the same time next Wednesday evening for another live broadcast of the Wednesday evening Bible study. We would love to see your comments regarding this broadcast. You may email us at imbr@imbmpodcast.com. That's imbr@imbmpodcasts.com. Or you may write to us at International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. That's International Missionary Baptist Radio, P.O. Box 1676, Smyrna, Tennessee 37167. Thank you for listening, and may you have a blessed day.